Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Ron Kaiser, and this is the Growing Older with Enthusiasm podcast. We are currently on the topic of winning in overtime, the concept of how you reach older adulthood with the attitude that enables you not just to exist, but to win. And as you have become aware on these podcasts, my co-host Neil Haley is the guy who's asking the questions to try and bring out my philosophy and my guidance with respect to how you win in overtime. So, Neil, I hope you're having a good day. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely, Dr. Ron. And I'm excited because last time we were really finding out what we need to do. Now the process is sometimes a lot of people do lose in overtime and they lose badly. Where you've watched a sporting event, the team made it to overtime, then they got crushed, especially in basketball or a sport where they lose by 20 after they made it right to the overtime mark, especially if you're watching the NCAAs. Well, that could be the same kind of thought process as our lifestyle today, right? Because ultimately we could just make it to overtime by the skin of our teeth, and then we lose, or there's a lot of things that stop us. And you define, and we talked backstage, that after 50 is when overtime begins, right?
Yeah, I like to think in terms of the second half century of life, so that even though the tasks and the things that we're doing in our 50s may be different than what we're doing in the 90s, we're still part of the same process. And I think to deny that kind of sets you up for losing in overtime. And that's why I feel passionately about the fact that it's important to think in terms of the second half century of life.
What would you define as losing in overtime before we get into specifically what's keeping people from winning in overtime?
Well, I think losing in overtime is just the same thing as losing in a game. The reality is that uh, you want to win everything that you do. You don't demand it, you're not perfectionistic, but you strive for it. As long as you're striving for it, then you've got a chance to continue to win. Losing essentially means that you become passive. It's what happens if people get to overtime and they're satisfied that they got there, and forget that the game is still going on, and they're the ones who get blown out. So I think it's the same kind of thing here. It's marked by reduced physical functioning, reduced cognitive functioning, reduced interest in life, and so on. That's what I consider to be losing, or at least not winning in overtime.
Yeah, and it's just when you talked about the non-negotiable four, and you talked about specifically enough area and how you have to keep taking care of those areas. If you are losing in overtime, you're not getting enough sleep, you're not eating quality meals, you're not exercising, and you're not really socializing with people, maybe just your spouse, and that's it. And then once you finally stop working, that socialization completely ends. And then you pretty much are living unlike you've lived your entire life, with structure, with order, with a sense of purpose.
Yeah, it's kind of like you've neglected the fact that overtime is a possibility. You may think it at some level, but you haven't prepared for it. And that's my hope, is that people will prepare to live in overtime, win in overtime, not decline in overtime, and maximize the quality of their lives uh, after they reach what for some people is a normal retirement age, even though people like myself don't retire.
Let's think about aging right now, Dr. Ron, because I think this is a good segue into the process. Lots of people don't like to get older. I guess all of us at one point don't want to get older. We wish we were back to our days where we were younger, when we could do things better. And we kind of, in our minds, kind of feel depressed or not happy that we're aging.
Well, that's the wrong way to look at it. I mean, the reality is aging begins as soon as we're born. There are things that we can do at age 14 that we can't do at age 4. There are things that we can do at age 40 that we can't do at age 14. And there are some things that we can do based on our accumulation of experiences and the way we keep ourselves in shape that we can do well into our 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. And the day will soon come when living beyond the 90s will be the norm.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that that's where the mistakes happen, or the impediments happen in aging, right? I mean, in the overtime area, that once your body starts to decline, you just let it decline completely.
Yeah, well, your body doesn't start to decline. You are not a passive participant in the decline if it's going to decline. So that, yeah, there definitely are things that you lose the ability to do the speed, some of the things that, and there is a loss of muscle mass unless you interfere with that process. So, I mean, the notion of decline is a passive notion. The fact is that, again, we're always in a state of change, and these are some of the changes that take place uh, in the older adult years. But there are also some, positive changes, some changes that can counteract any tendency to decline, and even changes that enable us to function more effectively. Uh, there are things that we can even improve on in the cognitive area, particularly if we have the time to devote to it. There are, people who are learning new skills because they have time to learn how to paint or learn a new language or travel to places where they can use the new language. And that's really good for your brain as well as for your body.
So let's talk about what stops us from winning in overtime. What are the areas we need to look out for?
Right. First of all, uh, you have to accept the fact that getting to overtime is not the goal. So that you have to prepare yourself for the fact that we don't uh, prepare ourselves for a passive period, but for an active period, which is why I speak of the non-negotiable four: keeping the body active, the mind active, uh, eating healthy, and making sure that we stay socially connected. So the preparation, and this is why, say, starting at age 50 and even earlier is important, is these are all skills that you don't start implementing at age 65 or 70. These are things that accumulate. So preparing for the fact that overtime is a possibility is what keeps a team from getting blown out by 20 points if they reach overtime in a basketball game. The other thing is that, uh, well, one of the two key other things is the fact that we don't have a lot of role models from uh, earlier generations of how to function in overtime because most people did not live long beyond retirement age. So that the notion that you can be very active at age 80, that you can be very active at age 90 is not something that we typically observed. So the fact that we didn't observe it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that's, what I see as one of my real roles is to make sure that people understand what the science is, what the possibilities are. There are a number of people who are doing wonderful work in the gerontology area, and there have been a number of uh, books who have and authors who have given guidelines of it. Walter Bortz, David Sinclair, Peter Attia have all written widely about how you can continue to function and grow uh, in overtime. Um, the other thing that I think is unfortunate is that people many people don't bring a winning attitude into overtime because they didn't really, they haven't been enjoying their work. They may not be enjoying their family. They may be worn out and not be working on some things that they could do to make things better. So, why do you want to continue this for decades longer? The paradox, however, is if you don't take the active steps to manage and own overtime, that you then become a victim of the course of events. Uh, and, you may go on for decades feeling even worse. And, this is the opportunity to recognize, hey, this is a time that I can take control of my life. This is a gift that I've been given, the gift of time, and I am going to maximize it. But if essentially life is not something that you experience in a positive way, that's a real impediment to winning in overtime. So I'm certainly going to put in a plug for my field in mental health, that I do think that among things that you can prepare for is to make sure if you're feeling, if your baseline mood is depressed or basically indifferent or not enthusiastic, get some help in that regard. I mean, the subtitle of my book, Rejuvenaging, was deliberately chosen. It's the art and science of growing older with enthusiasm. If you're enthusiastic about growing older, and if you're enthusiastic about being in overtime, uh, then you've got a great chance of being successful in it. Um, one of my favorite quotes comes from the book The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and this isn't a direct uh, interpretation of it, but it's pretty much along the lines of what he says, that victorious warriors win first, and then they go to battle. Losing warriors go to battle first, and then they try and figure out how to win. So that the important thing is to acknowledge, have the confidence, have the mindset that we're going to win. That's a first step. You don't go into overtime and expect to win by expecting to lose. That's paradoxical. So my hope, in the hope of this whole series, or my hope in building this whole series, is to create the mindset, the structure, the skills, uh, the advice, and so on, and the guidance to win in overtime by being a winner as you enter overtime.
See, I think that's fabulous advice in so many ways, and you're going to be able to win in overtime. I think that your mental health, as you talked about, that's what you did for a living, helping people through their challenges and issues and how to become better as people, especially when they're depressed or upset, have anxiousness. Is the fact is, if our mental health isn't well going into overtime, there's a good chance we're going to have faster cognitive decline, weight gain, and more pain in the whole body. Our mind is such an important part of success and winning in overtime.
Yeah, and that's not a fixed quantity. It's not something that, hey, you're born with good mental health, and or you're born with poor mental health and there's nothing you can do about it. It's the equivalent of going to the gym. That's why one of my entities is the mental health gym. That if you go to a gym, you'll see people of all shapes and sizes, uh, all levels of being in shape, but everybody has the same goal of self-improvement. And if that's your goal, then you have a real step up on the process of mastering and owning the older age ranges, which leads to winning in overtime.
So I guess, do we have anything more to add to part two? I think it was such great information we were able to cover today.
I think if we can kind of have people leave with the notion that uh, the mindset is a wonderful thing if you use it appropriately, that so much depends on uh, believing that you're a winner, believing that as you reach overtime, it's one more thing to win. And I do want to remind people, again, keeping the sports analogy in mind, that there are some teams that entered the NFL playoffs as wild card teams, which means they didn't even win their division and went on to win the Super Bowl. And I wish that for all of us as we move forward. And some of the subsequent uh, sessions will be a little more concrete in terms of actual steps that you can take in different areas to help in that regard.
And you could go ahead and contact you. The best place is go to your website. And what is your website?
Right, it's drron.com, and you can also find out more about, for those who need or want more specific guidance about our coaching program and things that enable you to more personalize the experience of preparing yourself to win in overtime.
All right. You'll close out Growing Older with Enthusiasm. I'm ready.
Okay, great.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Ron. Okay.
Thank you.